Hey everyone, I'm Melissa from Knitting the Stash, and in this video I want to talk about changing the colors in your sweater's yoke. And we've all seen those patterns that are two-tone, a dark background color and a light contrast color, or a light contrast color with a dark background color. And sometimes that works. Sometimes we really want a graphic, bold statement in our sweaters that's very two-toned and draws out the different values of the colors, something light and something dark. But other times we want to do a little bit more of a fade or a gradient or play down certain parts of the color work and play up others. So in this video, we're going to talk about a few different options for going from a two-tone colorwork sweater to a multi-colored sweater. And my sample for today that we'll get to throughout this video is this beautiful Snedronningan sweater by Isabell Kraemer. And if you look back at the original pattern photos that are up on her Ravelry site, you'll see that her original sample version is a dark background color and a light contrast color, so a very two-tone kind of sweater. What I wanted to do is mix it up a little bit and add a little bit more color to this particular yoke. But to do that, I had to look back through a lot of other yokes and think about what it was that I was trying to do with my color change for this particular yoked sweater. Now behind me, I lined up a lot of my colorwork sweaters from the past few years, and let's look through them and think about what's going on with each of them. So if I'd followed the original sample for the Snedronningan, I might have come up with something like this, which is a very two-tone kind of sweater, a dark background color and a light contrast color. And it's very graphic, right? And by that I mean it's very bold, and it draws your eye upward to the yoke, which really is the centerpiece of this sweater. And you're looking at the pattern details, you're thinking about the contrast value between the background color and the contrast color. And if you were to take a black and white photo of this, you would see the pattern still very, very clearly because these colors have such different values from each other. Now, if I had gone for a simple reversal, I might have knit up a sweater like this with a light background color and a darker contrast color for the yoke. This is Nasrin, also by Isabell Kraemer, and it is a sweater that also has a pretty high contrast value between the light background color and the dark contrast color. It's a little less graphic, if only because it's not a white yarn on a dark background or a black yarn on a white sweater. It is a kind of mix of I call that like a maroon on a kind of oatmeal-y or gray. So we're getting a little less of the high contrast, a little less of that kind of graphic look, just by softening the colors just a little bit. And I'll give you one more example of a very graphic two-color design. This one's from Albina McLaughlin, and it is, you can see, dark background color, lighter, brighter contrast color with a motif that really does draw the eye right up to the face and the upper neck and the yoke of the sweater. So those are some of the sweaters in my own collection that I looked to when I thought about how I wanted to knit this sweater and the colors I wanted to choose. Did I want it to be really graphic and bold? Not so much. Did I want to have a dark background and a kind of lighter yoke? Yes, but I didn't want it to pop as much. I wanted it to fade just a little bit. So that led me to some of the other sweaters in my collection that work with more colors and offer a kind of different fade that goes on in the yoke. And just for comparison's sake, I pulled up another of Dagbjört Guðmundsdóttir's sweaters. This one is also a beautiful colorwork Icelandic sweater, but in this case, you can see that the colorwork has a lot more of a kind of faded feel to it, and the brightest contrast, or the highest value contrast, is happening at the very top of the colorwork and the very bottom of the colorwork, so that the center here is actually fairly faded. Now, believe it or not, I think this sweater has 7 colors in it, and all of those colors fade very much to the center, right? So they're fading from the outside into the center. Now, I didn't want to do this with this particular sweater. I didn't want to draw attention to the center diamonds here, but that would be another option. And I've seen some beautiful projects completed with this Snedronningan sweater that do highlight those center diamonds. So this was one of the options I considered. Similarly, I looked at Weatherman, and this is an Icelandic sweater, and it's also a fade. So here we have something else going on. There's certainly some graphicness to this because you do have the contrast in the values right here with the neckband and this kind of brighter, whiter color. But you also have this fade kind of moving down so that the white brightness is right up by your face, and as you move down the yoke, you lose a little bit of the value contrast between the colors in the yoke and the colors of the background in the sweater. So the whole yoke kind of dissolves very nicely into the rest of the sweater. And I kind of liked that look. And that's what I ended up going with. You can see what I did here is I chose some lighter, whiter grays at the top and moving into some purples toward the bottom. Now that way, with a sweater like this, I didn't want to end up with a lot of attention down here at the bottom where I have these simple diamonds. I wanted to keep the focus up here at the top where the color work is a little bit more complex and moving in different kinds of directions. So with all that in mind, let's pull this sweater over to the work table, pull out the yarn I used, and look a little bit at some of the choices that I made in order to achieve this very cool fade from the top of the yoke to the bottom of the yoke. So here's Snedronningan up close and personal. You can see that the fade moves from kind of lighter grays up in the top to darker grays in the center down to this purple at the very bottom where most of the diamonds are. And this matches my idea for the fade that I saw in something like the Weatherman or Flight, where the primary contrast, the biggest difference in the value of the colors here is going to be at the top, and the lowest value is going to be at the bottom. This is almost a very muted version of the color work down here where the purple meets the blue. It's still visible, but it's not as visible as it would have been if I had used a very light contrast color all the way through the entire pattern. So let's take a look at the yarn. These are not the original colors that are called for in the pattern, but it is the same yarn. So this is a blend of wool, silk, and camel, single ply. And in the original, I believe it's a darker brown and a lighter kind of oatmeal color. So similar in terms of their value, a very dark color and a very light color. But the thing about this sweater is that you're holding two yarns together. So in her version, you are adding some mohair in, and so I did that as well. And you can see I added these two colors to my originals. Now this color mohair is very dark, almost a black. Not sure how it's going to come out on the camera here. It's not quite the same as this. This is a little bit more blue. This has a little bit more black in it. Once you put them together, you can see in the actual fabric of the sweater, you get this beautiful kind of rich color in the background, mostly because you have that slight bit of variation between the slightly lighter blue and this mohair. They really reflect well on each other. With the light color, I actually ended up using this mohair, which looks a little bit purple. It looks a little bit gray. It looks like it would be a strange kind of color combination with this whiter kind of oatmeal color. But when you hold them together, yarns do strange things. And you can see that what it's actually accomplished is to just simply mute the lightness of the white just a little bit in this upper portion of the sweater. And I'm going to try to hold it up here a little bit closer to the camera in the light so that you can see. You can still see the oatmeal, but that halo helps to mute everything. And then on the edges of these stitches, you can see the mohair kind of shining through a little bit of silver gray, which really changes and mutes that oatmeal color. To achieve this fade, what I wanted to do is introduce a couple of other colors to break up the contrast between these two and to add some more dimension to the color. So I had a fade set that I purchased from Old Crow Art Yarns, and this set actually included a pink at the end, which I decided to leave out of this particular palette because I liked the way that these four kind of played nicely with these other colors I was going to use for the sweater. Now, since I wanted my brightest contrast to be at the top, I decided to kind of set up my fade this way. All right, so the lightest color that I was going to hold with my mohair was going to be at the very top. The next color, which actually is very similar to the original color, so I ended up just using the original color, I set after the bright white. Then you get some gray, and finally the purple at the very bottom. Now what that's going to do is create just what we saw with the Weatherman and Flight, which is that higher contrast at the top, lower contrast at the bottom. So I held the white just singly without any mohair up here at the top. These very little flecks, these little fleas at the very top are in just this white yarn with the blue and the mohair held together in the background. Then like I said, this color is very similar to this color. So I just kind of left it aside and used this color for the center portion of the colorwork motif. And I held it double with this beautiful silvery mohair. So that's what you get when you're looking right here. Then I decided to bring in the gray for these diamonds. Now I had looked on some Ravelry pages and seen that other people had, like I said, really highlighted these diamonds by using a pop of color. So, you know, if I had chosen to use that pink, that could have been a place to put it if I really wanted to highlight these center diamonds. But I wanted to go for that kind of muted fade look. So I decided to bring in my gray for the outside of the diamonds. Now, because I knew I was going to be using the purple at the bottom, I wanted to introduce it in a couple of other places on this sweater so that it wouldn't just show up as like, whoa, where'd the purple come from? So you can see up here at the top, I introduced a little bit of purple in these original diamonds, right? Tiny, tiny bits of purple in strategic places just to give the hint that the purple is coming in this sweater. And then inside these gray diamonds, I decided to include purple here. And one of the ways that I got away with that without having hugely long floats is that I also stole some stitches on the inside of each of these diamonds. I think you can see that here. So this stitch and this stitch are also purple, which allows me to only have to strand that color work over about 4 stitches, even though I'm working with 3 colors at this point, right? Because I have the background color, I have the gray, and I have the purple. They all can stay in nice alignment because I also stole those little stitches on the edges of my diamonds. Now moving down here, then I could move right into the purple, and I decided to split the little fleck here in the middle of this diamond. The top is a gray, the bottom is a purple, and that way I end up with kind of the introduction of the purple all the way down through the yoke, so that when it finally shows up in the end, it's not a huge surprise. It just looks like it's part of this organic kind of fade that I've achieved in the rest of the sweater. Now, one thing I did consider was to work this fade in reverse with the purple at the top and the bright white at the bottom. And I ruled that out again because what I wanted to do was draw the eye up rather than down. I wanted to, these diamonds at the bottom weren't as interesting to me. And if I had done these diamonds, knit these diamonds with a very light color, even in a gray color or the original kind of color, they would have popped a lot more than what's going on here, which is that this upper portion, which is a little bit more complex, a little bit more stuff going on, it's not just diamonds, this pops more, this fades very nicely into the background of the sweater. So I didn't work with that, I just flipped it over like that, but it's an interesting idea. If you have a fade set and you have a background color, you could even lay your swatch out and kind of move your colors around to see which way you think looks to your eye kind of like the best possibility for adding color to your yoke. If I haven't swatched yet and I'm just not sure where I want to even start, sometimes pulling out graph paper, colored pencils, and some of your favorite colorwork books might be the best inspiration you can find. With graph paper, you can kind of mess around with the different colors, and whether or not you have a simple set of pencils or a very elaborate set of pencils, you can really get a sense of how a design might look on paper before you ever go to swatch it. If you have some colorwork books that you love, flipping through those pages can be one of the best ways to figure out if you want to go with a kind of two-tone look, or if you want to do something that's going to be much more complex with multiple different colors, how you want your fade to work, whether you want a dark background with a light contrast color or a light background with a dark contrast color. All of these kinds of things can be easily seen in some of these wonderful sample books for colorwork inspiration. Sometimes we need to go to our sweater stashes or our closets to see what our options might be and the kinds of colors that we like to see and colorwork patterns that we like to see in our yokes. Sometimes we need to lay out the swatch and the yarn and play around with different combinations and see how the fades look if we arrange the yarn in different ways. And sometimes we just need to go and get our graph paper and our colored pencils and do it the old-fashioned way. Mock up the colors that you're thinking about working on and think about what kind of fade or what kind of color you want in your next colorwork sweater. I hope you'll try something new with your next yoked sweater, and I'll see you in the next video.